All right. So, welcome everybody. I'm super excited to be here for this event. I read this book and absolutely loved it. So, Stephen Markley is the author of Ohio, which is a very successful novel that takes place in the course of one evening, as well as two other books before the one that we're discussing tonight. One was a memoir about trying to get a book published called Publish This Book, and the other was a travel log called Tales of Iceland. So, there's quite a bit of range there. For those who haven't read this book, Deluge, it's a terrifying and in-depth look at the near future. For me, as a longtime climate activist, I often find that climate fiction spends a lot of time and does a lot of work getting the science right, but often is pretty shallow on the social science, on society and social movements. And one of the things that I really admire and respect about this book that I think makes it really useful for us as organizers is just how deeply it delves into the complex dynamics of how political forces operate and how they can be impacted, how movements get things right, how movements get things wrong. Um, and I found the book very insightful about how society is likely to unravel as the crisis intensifies. And also for looking at like pathways that work and don't work and how you understand all of that. The book is a great page turner because of the characters and plot, but it's also truly helpful for facing the tasks that we have before us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen for about 30 minutes to kind of give a presentation. And then we're going to do a question and answer period after that. You're welcome to drop questions into the chat as we go along. And Graham from Oil and Gas Action Network is going to be gathering your questions, putting them in a document for me to then ask the questions and kind of curate the questions as we go through that. So with that, I will turn it over to Stephen.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. You guys will have to forgive me off the bat. I'm writing on a TV show called Paradise. They're filming my episode right now. I was out in the desert in like 93-degree heat all morning. I'm all sunscreened up. I'm tired, uh, all that good stuff. But it's great to be here with you. And I thought I would just start. I'm just gonna read like the smallest of excerpts. And this is what the book came out in 2023, I was spending, I'd go out and do my book tour. And this is a fragment of the piece I would typically read. And I think what is so interesting and awful and a little bit awe-inspiring about this piece is that the book, though it's set in the near future, is beginning to feel more like a historical document, and a historical document in which like the dystopia I imagine is radically underwhelming compared to where we're going. And so anyway, you're going to hear some numbers in this that reflect sort of my best guesses when I wrote this chapter in 2014. Um, so basically, the novel is a multi-character view of the future. It starts in 2013 in our recent recognizable past, and it moves through till 2040. So what the book's project is to take like sort of the this 360-degree view of our country and our world and where we're headed with the climate crisis, not just in terms of the environmental impacts, but the social, economic, and political impacts as well. So this brief bit is from a chapter where one of the main characters, this activist, Kate Morris, is giving a speech in Phoenix. And Kate is sort of someone who at a very opportune moment has sort of galvanized the climate movement back into relevance. So she's sort of barnstorming the country, giving her speech, and this is just a little bit from it. So she says, so here's my whole presentation. Soak it up. A big logo behind her switches to 430 ppm. I should mention that this chapter is from December of 2026. I'm not telling you anything new, she says. That is the carbon dioxide level of the atmosphere today. We started at around 280 before the Industrial Revolution. We know the absolute safe upper threshold is 350, which the world blew by in the 90s, and it's still rising at the rate of 2 to 3 parts per million every year. It's as simple as this. The fate of every man, woman, child, and species on this planet is bound to this number. Nothing matters unless we can stop and eventually reverse that number. What most scientists have been wrong about, Morris continues, is how quickly our planet's systems could unravel given this additional heat. The chaos we're seeing today is from just a 1.2 degree temperature rise. Now we have feedback loops to fear. Scientists believe that by the end of the century, the permafrost could release 100 billion tons of methane, which is equivalent to 270 years of emissions at our current levels. I'm going to skip ahead. We have a precious handful of years left to act, and I promise you this, if you do not join this movement now, you will wake up 10, 15, 20 years from now and feel sick that you didn't do everything you could during the sliver of time when we still had a chance, when we hadn't yet fallen over the brink. So what does that mean? First of all, forget about your carbon footprint. Carbon footprint is a PR term invented by an oil company. I want you to remember two words. These words replace 430 behind her. They knew. They are the carbon majors, the 100 companies responsible for over 70% of emissions since the 80s. Their own scientists knew what would happen. They knew if they kept burning their reserves, they would threaten the future of the human race. They knew and they built their oil rigs to account for higher sea levels and more intense storms. They knew and they told us to focus on our consumer behavior while they locked us all into structures of hyperconsumption. They knew and they waged a propaganda war of denial and delay. They knew and they're still doing it. There is no other way to put it. They are committing the greatest atrocity in human history, and they knew. They knew and they told us to worry about our fucking carbon footprints. Okay, so what do we notice from that chapter? First of all, the number I gave of 400. I'm sorry, is there a way we can hide my self view or remove the spotlight? Is that at all possible? It's just weird. I hate looking at myself.
Sure.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Um, so that number, the first number is 430, which we're at right now, right? And it's so I was 18 months off from that. We obviously jumped, I think, 4 parts per million in the last year or so. So I missed that one. The other one, 1.2 degrees, boy, does that seem optimistic now that we've hit 1.5, according to most scientists. Along with that, the political evolution that the book predicts feels like it's pretty much already here. And I was faced with this really difficult choice, because I started the novel in 2010. And sort of the animating political event when I started it was the failure of cap and trade in Obama's first term, right? So I was basing a lot of my conception of how do we get back to some sort of political situation like that, while this then more fictitious right-wing fossil fuel powered movement grows in power. Obviously, in 2016, that took a big leap forward. And as I was editing the book, I turned in the first draft to my editors in February of 2020. So what happened in February of 2020? Well, a month later, the world shuts down from COVID. So I was like racking my brain to incorporate all of these rapidly evolving situations, including whatever would happen in the 2020 election. And I sort of came to the decision like, okay, I think Biden's going to win. I'm going to write the book as if that's what happens. And obviously he did. But my prediction of what happens in the 2024 election in the Deluge was unfortunately incorrect. And I, sort of stand by that in terms of like, for the plot to operate, I needed another 2 decades for the evolution of this movement, this like fossil fuel powered right wing fascist movement to evolve. But it feels like it's all just been dumped in our laps, like in the last, few months. And so yeah, so that's been like the incredible head fuck of conceiving and writing and promoting and advocating with the novel is that the events have just swallowed it completely. I watched, this is my apartment in Los Angeles, and I watched through this window right here, like half the city burned down, basically. And it was just so eerie to look outside and see the sky orange and smoke everywhere. And the way the fire started is exactly how this mega fire in Los Angeles started in the novel. A few years of record precipitation, followed by a dry snap, followed by sort of record-setting Santa Ana winds. And there you have it. So yeah, it's been a really, really strange experience, both because of the book's prescience and because of what it couldn't predict in terms of how fast everything has moved. And I do think, like, to a degree, this is a question I think I bet all of you ask yourselves all the time is like, what more could I be doing? What should I be doing? I spent 12 years on this, and often I'd be like, well, should I go throw paint at an art museum or should I go, chain myself to the White House? Like, what should I do? I sort of, because writing is my passion and fiction is my passion, I have just felt like this is the best use of my talents in order to alert people, in order to not just like alert them to what's happening, because a lot of us know that, but to make people feel emotionally what the stakes of this actually are. I think one of the most frustrating or dismaying encounters I'll have is with somebody who believes in everything in all of this and is not like doesn't have their head stuffed up their ass on Fox News, but they sort of can compartmentalize it into something that will not really affect them or their children. But this is like the whole ball game, right? I guess that is that's the part of it that really like still galls me a little bit is that people can know about it, but sort of tune it out. Um, so yeah, so those are some sort of rambly thoughts I'm having at the moment. Obviously, I bet like most of you, I sort of like go to the news every day and I'm just like so stunned, which is the intention of it all, right? That you constantly feel set back on your heels. Um, and so I'm in that moment right now and just, trying to get out there, trying to do stuff like this. I'm going over to Europe for a bit of a book tour this summer and to meet with some activists there. And a long-term goal of mine, or long-term, short-term, hopefully, goal of mine is still to adapt the Deluge because unfortunately, I think the amount of people reading books right now is far smaller than the people advocating for the climate crisis, even. So perhaps getting it to the screen would be a good next step. Um, yeah, so we can move ahead to questions and answers. Obviously, I'm happy to answer anything.
Grant, can you just help by getting the questions into the doc that I'm using? So the first one I want, there's so much tension and synergy in the book between different movement
Yeah.
approaches. Can you talk about the historical movement lessons that influenced your book and just how you thought about that part of the book?
Yes, it's a great question because I think what the book sets out to do is as a polemicist, you have a point of view. As a fiction writer, obviously, I have a point of view about the climate crisis, but also I'm trying to remove my point of view and
Mhm.
inhabit the mindset of people who are advocating for different tactics. There's a group of eco-saboteurs called 6 Degrees that is blowing up pipelines, destroying fossil fuel infrastructure. There's a more sort of traditional activist, Kate Morris, who I just read from, who is trying to galvanize in the political sphere, but using sort of a different set of tactics than I think we might be used to. There's a scientist who is sort of straightforward, like I am going to do my science and that's what I'm responsible for. A mathematician sort of looking at the very specific policies, very dryly and very sort of dispassionately, and a range of other characters in between. And I think what I wanted to do was offer everybody sort of the chance to think about, well, what will work? Like that's always been my sort of baseline is like a tactic is all well and good if it gets something accomplished. If it doesn't, then it's a waste of time, and we have to figure out how we move to the next thing, how we adjust, how we reimagine those things that might make progress. Um, and so yeah, it was a big thought experiment. Like the whole book is a thought experiment, and I was just
Mhm.
trying to give voice to sort of all this range of people thinking about the problem from all these different angles.
Thank you. Okay, David Hughes asks, Kate Morris says she will work with anyone opposed to fossil fuels. Anyone. Are you recommending that kind of tolerance, very much against purity politics for the climate movement? Does that approach make you and Kate carbon fundamentalists? Should we focus more on 430 ppm and less on toxins, racial justice, and democracy? There's a lot in that question.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great question. I think focusing on ppm in the end is focusing on those other things, and it's sort of a canard to believe that it's not. Um, I think what is the biggest sort of wildfire in the midst of our democratic system right now is the influence of the fossil fuel powers. Anywhere in the world where we see these movements rising, fossil fuel is there, right? And particularly in the United States, which obviously one of the world's largest oil and gas producers, the power of these industries has completely perverted our already imperfect democratic system. Like I don't want to stand here and say we had everything figured out, before this moment because we definitely didn't. But their continued sort of, I mean, they moved from a stance of like, well, we're going to quietly fund Democrats and Republicans. We'll sort of have everybody working for us to, all right, we'll focus on Republicans. All right, now we're going to focus on the craziest fucking people we can get into office who will do whatever we say. And that's sort of the movement that's come to the forefront. And so I do believe that by destroying their power, we fight that movement in itself, right? Um, and also, by focusing on PPM, we are, of course, focusing on environmental justice. Obviously, there are always these sort of issues of conflict that get all of the popular attention and that serve as wedges in the movement. But at the end of the day, what environmental justice is there on a planet 3 degrees warmer? Like there isn't it. It just doesn't exist. And obviously, the people affected by the climate crisis are going to be the most marginalized first and foremost. That's sort of obvious, right? Um, and yeah, to me, it's just like we are losing our window to hold this below a threshold that anything that we understand as civilization can hang on. And I think that's sort of like what the fight has become. We're already, well past the realm of safety at 1.5. So, that the sort of window for like any kind of utopia or like any kind of like um return to the planet we knew is gone. And so now we're in like sort of a triage state, like, and every tenth of a degree matters. How do we keep this to 1.7? How do we keep it to 1.9? How do we keep it, if we miss that, how do we keep it to 2.1? Like those are unfortunately the sort of set of circumstances we have to realistically be thinking about.
Yeah, yeah, no, I really feel that. And it's RL wants to ask a question about hope and optimism. And I think
Yeah.
it's I just want to say before throwing that to you, I think that idea that every tenth of a degree matters actually for, hundreds of millions of
Yeah,
people is one way to think about that, right? Which is
absolutely.
like let's make it better, like as least bad as it can be, which is different from optimism and hope. But I just wanted to throw that question at you about
Yeah.
how do you understand the sort of dynamics of and I actually really appreciate in this book the depth of pessimism in the book, and yet it's also not quietistic. Do you know what I mean? It's not
Right.
just like we're screwed, give up. Which so I just I'd love to hear you just talk about how you think about that sort of ball of concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a climate activist over in the UK who I meet with regularly when I go over there, named Rupert Reed, who coined this term. I think it's his. I'm pretty sure it's his. It's which is through-topia. Obviously, utopia off the menu. Dystopia we don't want. That's like we're trying to avoid that.
Mhm.
So a through-topia being the idea that how do we squeeze through this keyhole that is going to represent a lot of upheaval and a lot of suffering, but how do we do it in first of all the quickest, the most just, and you know, sort of the the amount that leaves the least suffering for the most amount of people behind, right?
Mhm.
And that's what the book is. It's a thought experiment about, okay, we've let this get out of control. Like in many ways, our political and economic elites failed us enormously. We as citizens, some of us did what we could, others not so much. But here we are. What do we do
Mhm.
now? That's what the book represents. What do we do now? Um, and so in terms of moving to like what keeps me hopeful is that actually like in the last, let's say 5 years to 7 years maybe, we have seen, and this is also missing from my novel, we have seen sort of a staggering turnaround in the economics of clean energy. Not turnaround, but
Mhm. Yeah.
advance, right? Was just reading this report that said globally, we are now at 40.9% of our power supply is coming from zero carbon energy, whether that's nuclear or wind and solar. And as we all know, the price of solar and the price of batteries are on a learning curve that just has defied even the wildest expectations. This
Right.
is an enormous arrow in our quiver. Um, and so I think like even when I talk to, I have a friend who works in Congress, and even when it really is like the darkest of the dark days in these past few months, it's still like the global trends are the same they've been. You look at Pakistan, which is just like hurtling up solar panels onto roofs, and batteries are moving in that same direction. And you start to look at this and you're saying to yourself, okay, this trend is not going anywhere. Like it doesn't matter what the
Mhm.
fossil fuel industry does, like this trend is going to continue no matter how many headwinds they try to put in its way. Um, and so I think that is the one element that I'm still like, all right, this is real, right? Like this is not my wishful thinking. This is not sort of me trying to put a silver lining on it. This is like the built environment. It's the hardware going up onto roofs and into fields all over the world.
Yeah, no, I really agree with you. And you see so much of that in the global south too. There's like the ton going on in Africa too, right? With
Yeah.
people putting up like small community microgrids and things like that. So yeah. Okay, and then keeping with the kind of the pessimism talk, I've got a question from Matt Nichols, which is you talk about the organization founded by Kate Morris that later pivots to providing emergency relief and support mutual aid networks in part as an organizing strategy. Given the speed of the disasters and the insane cuts in the federal response, is that the current most important thing?
I mean, I'm always going to say like right now there is the IRA is under attack in Congress with this reconciliation bill. That to me is priorities number one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10.
Yeah,
Um, the climate movement should be doing everything in its power to organize to defend those tax credits. Like the difference between where we will be if we can keep the majority of that bill in place and where we will be if we do not is night and day. And I like and look, this is just my 2 cents. Nobody has to agree with me. I was pretty disappointed that more of the climate movement was not able to rally to win the 2024 election. It sticks in my throat very, very strongly. I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times back when Biden was still the nominee. Um, and obviously got all the messages and dipshit hate mail from people gorging on right-wing TikTok. But I also got a lot of stuff from people who I think would consider themselves of the left of the climate movement. This thing, the Willow Project in Alaska, was apparently like the greatest travesty in the history of time, even though it represented an infinitesimal amount of emissions. And I just think like if the Democrats manage to pass a bill like the Inflation Reduction Act, imperfect though it may be, and the climate movement cannot rally to protect their seats and protect the presidency, then we're not going to see anyone try stuff like that again. I work
yeah,
sometimes donate to an organization called the Environmental Voter Project that sort of highlights one of the problems, and I just wanted to share this with you. What they keep pointing out is that in exit polling, here was the 2024 election and what people cared about. 39% economy, jobs, immigration, abortion, healthcare, climate change down here at 7%. So if
mhm,
there's not electoral demand for action on climate, we're in a lot of trouble
yeah,
because politicians just aren't going to respond to it. And as we're seeing right now, like who controls the federal government is of enormous consequence. So
right.
yes, like, do I think mutual aid and the type of activism that can be done through that is important? Yes, of course. But compared to the major levers of our society and the major levers of our economy, like we have to keep pushing on those.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to say that I personally really agree with you about that and to not have purity, but just always be realistic about like what are the forces ahead of us and how do we deal with, moving each of them forward as much as we can. Okay, Deb asks, she says, in the novel, Deborah Sylvie, in the novel, the fossil fuel industry is still pretending to care about climate change, with Jackie doing PR for them. But now there's no more pretense. They're showing just how rotten they are. Can this do our movement any good?
Them showing how rotten they are.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like, there's a sense in which like the greenwashing of, we all saw the ads the past few years of like, Exxon like happily like we're working on biofuels, we're working on da da da. Look, we're lowering emissions from our blah blah blah, all that sort of stuff. Which I do think like the reason they do it is because it works, right? It has this weird
Mhm.
hypnotic effect. Somebody once said to me like even when you see advertising like that and it's bullshit, it's reassuring, right?
Mhm.
And especially if you're not passionate about this subject like so many of us are. I think to sort of your standard middle of the road person, they're sort of saying like, see, like it'll all work out, like it's like that kind of like uh,
Mhm.
again, that like that sort of hypnosis. Look, part of the reason I came to Hollywood and I'm here and trying to make stuff here is because I think Hollywood has failed enormously in telling stories about the climate crisis and about not just the climate crisis, but the complicity of the fossil fuel industry in knowing about this back in like, as early as the 50s,
Yeah.
waging a propaganda war to deny and delay. In the past few years, the opioid crisis has gotten every treatment you can imagine in every format. And that's something that's also close to my heart, coming from Ohio and having had, multiple friends, go through that terrible sort of ordeal. But you know, frankly, that pales in comparison to what the fossil fuel industry did. It's nothing. It's a blip in the historic record compared to what they've done. And so I really I think this is at least an opportunity to sort of keep banging the drum of like, look, we have their in their own writing, in their own documents, them saying they knew what was going to happen and they did it anyway.
Yeah, right. And I'll say that, and I think one of the reasons that that's really important is to take away their political power, because right now, the biggest break on the transition that we need to have is the political power of that industry, which is just enormous. So yeah, the more they're painted as the bad guys, the more we can kind of hopefully get things to change. Okay, Taylor Werner asks, in the book, the climate itself feels like a character, sometimes a protagonist, other times an antagonist. I recognize that from real life. Luck and timing for social movements sometimes flowing from the natural world. I'm wondering what your thoughts and feelings were like while writing that into the book.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thinking just from a literary point of view was like I needed these big sort of tentpole moments. Like the mega fire in LA was one of those. There's a massive hurricane at the end, just like sort of like demonstrating the power of what was coming, was something I was always thinking about. But also like contrasting it with these moments of enjoying the natural world. I am somebody who tries to at least like get out into nature every once in a while and just remind myself like, yeah, this feels better, right? This feels much better. And I think keeping that reverie in the book and that sort of awe at what we all share and what we have potentially we're facing the loss of was a really important part of structuring the novel. Um, and I just sort of tried to make sure that there's the ending sort of takes place in this really the very last moment of the book in this really sort of like beautiful experience of these two characters and just trying to remind people like yeah this is worth saving, like this is worth doing everything we can for.
I just want to take that back to the whole optimism hope thing, because I mean, I think that sense of us always remembering what we're fighting for, and the it can be better and it can be worse, and that our action makes a difference in that. I just think that's part of what I'm hearing from you that I think is really important. That it's not about like, oh, is it going to be good or is it going to be bad? No, like this is what we care about, and so this is what we're fighting for. So thank you for that. Okay, staying on that literary tip, Martin Turner says, I'm curious what authors were influential for you in this book, as fiction or nonfiction.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta admit, not like fiction wise, whenever people ask me that, I sort of don't have an answer because I've like never had sort of like a primary set of literary influences. I think every writer is this enormous amalgamation of everybody they've ever read, sometimes good and bad. I was a huge, huge, huge Stephen King fan as a kid, and I really think like his novel The Stand like played a role in sort of my thinking about like I want to write a massive epic tome someday.
Mhm.
What better subject for a massive epic tome than a massive epic problem?
Mhm.
Certainly that's always an answer I like to give. But I spent much more time, obviously, if you've read the book, you can tell this, doing the research and reading a lot of nonfiction. And I was lucky enough to also interview scientists and economists and activists and everybody in between. And one of the people I was really lucky to get to interview was James Hansen, obviously a
Mhm.
NASA scientist who brought very much helped bring this to the world's attention. And I was just like I was obviously like I admire that man enormously, and I stole a bunch of his sort of his demeanor for one of the main characters.
Right.
Scientists really are like he's delivering some of the most galvanic news you could possibly imagine, and he's so staid and he's so quiet and he's so Iowan, he's so Midwestern, he's so just like and a little bit grumpy about having to like do this.
Right.
And I took a lot of that and put it into the character of Tony.
Nice. And have you connected with Hansen since the book? I'm just wondering, like, what he thinks about his, what you
I'm
did.
not sure if he's read. I sent him an email, but he is a very busy person, so I try
For
not,
sure.
yeah, I try not to bother anybody beyond what I need to bother them for.
Totally fair. Okay. Luis asks, as an organizer, the mechanism for great societal change is organizing majorities to take action against an unsustainable and unjust system in order to win better living conditions for all. What do you think the climate justice movement can do better in regards to reaching more people and working towards a mass movement that creates long-term change?
Oh, that's a great question. And if I honestly, with a lot of this stuff, it's like if I had the answer, I would be pounding my fist a little harder. Um, Look, I like there are always tensions when you're trying to build a movement under a massive tent, right? And I think this is not in particular the climate movement's problem. It's any movement for change's problem, especially in the context right now where we are all we are all engaging with each other on modes of communication that bring conflict to the forefront. The primary way we all speak to each other is through this thing we call social media, actually surveillance capitalism, which is designed to bring to the forefront, paranoia, anxiety, anger, depression, all these other sort of useless emotions when you're trying to connect with people and change their minds and bring again, a lot of people together into under a big tent. And something that I think the climate movement could do better, don't ask me how, is well, all right, I have opinions about I have a lot of opinions. It is how do we win the places we don't think it's possible to win? How do we win Wyoming? How do we win Ohio? How do we win Indiana? Like I'm from Ohio, so I think about this particular topic all the time. And not to beat a dead horse, a soon to be dead horse, but one of the pieces of genius within the Inflation Reduction Act, I think, is
Yeah.
that it distributed the benefits to a lot of areas where people do not give a shit about climate change, but they do care about the way their communities have been hollowed out
Yeah.
over the course of neoliberalism's ascent, let's say. Uh,
Mhm.
and the fact that like this bill did not really get a chance to play out. So, I mean, we're already seeing the tension in the Republican caucus because a lot of them know, and I have this on good information, a lot of them really don't want to vote for this version of the bill. They really don't want to gut the IRA because they know what it means for their districts, their communities, but they're terrified of Trump. They're
Yeah.
terrified of him.
Yeah.
But at least it's created that schism, right?
Yeah.
And so as the benefits of the clean energy economy flow into these corners, especially corners without jobs, with a lot of problems with opiates and the rest, a lot of despair, like that would start to change the math at least. And so again, it's like I don't think we're ever going to convince everybody that the questions of environmental justice are should be their first priority or will be. Like that's never going to happen. But there are ways you can look for schisms between their movement, between the fossil fuel, the fossil fuel's impact on those communities, and use it to affect change. If sorry, that was a little marble mouthed, but I think you understand my drift.
No, 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 it wasn't. Yeah, no, I think that was really good. And I want to push you a little further on that too, because that's been my sense too, that, you have so many places like South Dakota and Texas, right, where wind and solar are just, having a tremendous impact on their energy systems, but also kind of on their economies. And so do you think that that's kind of like the focus for those kind of folk, is just those basic kind of economic and energy security kinds of arguments, as opposed to the getting into the politics?
Well, I think right now we are in a moment when like that's necessary because that's where the brunt of sort of the animating anger out there is coming from.
Hmm.
But obviously, we should never give up. If a company's poisoning a bunch of people, then we should stick our hands up and say, "Yo, this company's poisoning a bunch of people. Like this is
Right.
bullshit, right?" Like you can't like so like I never would tell people like shy away because oh we got to be careful. You have to speak
Mhm.
power on issues like that. Um, at the same time, there are differences. Like I'm sure you've all become aware of sort of things that go under the umbrella of environmental justice that are actually like rich people don't like windmills in their oceanfront property views,
Right.
or we don't want a solar field here because whatever like sort of lame excuse that is propped up. I deal with this in my own sort of back home. Sorry, I was just back home, so I'm thinking about this stuff a lot. Where the community is fighting like hell, or parts of the community are fighting like hell against this solar farm that would lower everybody's energy bills. And basically, the reason is we don't want it to ruin the rural character of our, of our community. Obviously, the whole thing is being backed by this fossil or this natural gas. Um, they build compressors in a factory in my hometown. That company is sponsoring a lot of this, but it's still effective. It's sort of one of those things where you're like, okay, well, I guess that's an environmental issue. You don't want a solar field in your backyard, but like, it's not really. It's not what we're actually talking about. Anyway, sorry.
Right.
I'm a big
Yeah, yeah.
rambler, you can tell. And I,
No,
yeah,
no, no. It's all good. No, super
I
interesting.
went from being so exhausted when I sat down to be like, no, listen to me. Like, it's like
No, it's people are here to listen to you talk, and
pretty
it's
typical,
great.
pretty typical.
No, it's awesome. Okay, from Brooke, we've got first off appreciation. Thank you for this brilliant contribution to the conversation and movement. Question. So much of the root of ecological crisis is colonization and slavery and the forced dislocation of peoples from their ancestral lands that they've stewarded for tens of thousands of years. And so much of who is showing us the way forward are indigenous um, struggled direct action toward water protection, land back, traditional ecological knowledge, etc. If you were writing more, what indigenous struggles would you lift up integral to what it means to fight for a livable future?
Well, I mean, part of the book is like a chapter takes us back to Dakota, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and it's sort of set there. Like a portion of the backstory, I should say, is set there. Um, and so certainly those are movements that I looked at intensely and used to inform the novel. As far as like sort of the broad like that's an enormous basket of ideas and questions. I don't know how to cover all of it in one answer, except to say like I think on the one hand it's fascinating stuff and we should all be paying attention to it, and on the other hand I have not seen it move people outside of the enclave of the climate left. And that's sort of like where my pragmatism has always come in, where it's like, yeah, I find this stuff great. I find it fascinating. I'm constantly, I'm actually like engaged, like, yeah, I don't want to talk about what I'm working on next, but it's like something I've been thinking about a lot. Um, are those stories and what they mean to both our past and where we're going?
Mhm.
However, in terms of like the practicalities of it, I think it hasn't like broken into the mainstream in any way, and in fact, is sort of difficult to talk about without turning people off, if that makes sense. And again,
Yeah.
I'm from Ohio, and that is a place that was colonized and conquered many centuries ago. It has this before the Trail of Tears, it had its own Trail of Tears. It is home to ancient burial mounds that are some of like the most important like relics of ancient North America we have. Uh, and at the same time, it's like I need to figure out how to make those people in my hometown build a solar farm, and that is like where sort of my like head as an activist has gone.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And actually, there was a question that Graham put in earlier that I feel like that speaks to, which is like the question about so that part of your strategy really is to, without compromising your politics or being not politically correct in any way, to really think about what speaks to the mainstream and what's going to actually make a difference. So one of the questions that Graham's crew had put in from earlier was about were there some intentional strategies that you used to break through to the mainstream? Because this book has been more successful than a lot of other climate fiction books. So just thinking about, just to say more
Yeah.
about your strategic choices around how to have broad impact.
Yes. All right. Well, I mean, those are sort of, let me break that into two questions. The
Yeah,
strategy with the novel is that first and foremost, it is not didactically telling people what to think about anything, right?
right.
Like a good piece of literature or storytelling comes at the issue with questions and doesn't provide answers. And by asking those questions, it allows people the space to open their minds and think about it in this broader sense. And my dedication is not to the climate, it's the storytelling, which might be uh, a really like damning thing to admit. But my commitment to this novel was to writing something in which the characters were true to themselves, whether they felt like lived in real people, and in which I wasn't judging them, even the really like awful ones who are
Right.
in the book, even in the characters who commit terrible crimes and other characters who are legitimately working for the fossil fuel interests. Like, so holding back my judgment and exploring how they view the world and what their engagement with it is. And I think that that sort of commitment made the novel successful. Uh,
Mhm.
the other part is now I have to go out and talk about climate a lot. And
Uh-huh.
that is something I sort of understood would happen when I was writing it, but it was all academic until I was getting invited to stuff like this, until I was actually out in the world answering questions. Sometimes the audiences that were not that are much less receptive than you all are to
Right.
what we're talking about, right? So I have to be able to talk about this issue in a way that like I obviously can stay true to myself, but that makes sense to you all, and that makes sense to a group of people in Milwaukee, most of whom are like staring at me like I was fucking insane
Yeah.
when I was talking about some of these issues, right? Um, and I think that that is where like so much of my pragmatism comes from. Also potentially from like writing a character like Ash. Ash is the mathematician who's sort of like basically designing policy to save the world by the end of the book. Um, was like in the process of writing the book, I was like, okay, what actually would have to happen for us to not like sprint over the brink of catastrophe?
Hmm.
What major things would have to change about our economy, about our civilization in order to stop this? And what tools do we have within all the institutions that exist? Like a rule I made for myself is I'm not allowed to imagine an eco-socialist revolution suddenly springs forth and everything is honky-dory. Like
Yeah.
I have to use the institutions that the world has now, that the United States of America has now. I even like paid careful attention to the filibuster, right? Like it's like
Yeah.
all those little like details matter to me because I wanted it like the end to serve as a roadmap to say like, look, we can do this. We still
Yeah.
have time, we still have a chance, and we have everything we need, technology, policy, like we know it all. We just have to find somehow summon the political will.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Matt Nichols asks, this may be awful, but I want to somehow harness American rage towards oil companies and their lackeys. The book mentions it briefly. Name natural so his idea is like, can we name natural disasters after climate deniers like Hurricane Imhoff, which killed 40 people in Kentucky. What do you think about that idea?
Sure, yeah. I mean, you'll have a tough time convincing the Trump Noah to do that.
Yeah, that would be the
I'm up
problem.
for it.
Yeah. Okay. So Igor asks, it seems to me recently that our information ecosystem is upstream of our work on climate change. Attention, understanding, knowledge. Even climate disasters cannot galvanize the public because there's so much distraction. What do you think about how to engage there? How to overcome astroturfing the marketing companies, the distraction machine? If Netflix competes with sleep, how does climate change compete with Netflix?
Yeah. Okay. So this is it. You put it to me in one of our pre-questions. What have you changed your mind on? And if I was writing the book over again, I would put a much more intense spotlight on surveillance capitalism and on our information ecology, which
Yeah.
I mean, I think even in the last like 5 years, I've had a big like, sort of confrontation with myself with about how like destructive this is. I do not think it's at all an accident whatsoever that the two most powerful people in the world right now are one of whom who mastered uh,
Yeah.
Twitter first and understood it intuitively as a bully, as somebody who could
Mhm.
garner attention even for saying stuff that we would have thought disqualifying, but that actually helped him.
Yeah.
Um, and that the second person is the guy who bought the fucking company, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
this is not a coincidence. And what
Yeah.
scares me is that, this is surveillance capitalism 1.0. That's the results
Mhm.
of 1.0. Who's coming out of TikTok 10 years from now? Who's coming out of whatever chat GPT, AI, fucking whatever that's going to exist in 10 years? And the reason it's so damaging, and this is something that I was galled by, when the TikTok ban was preparing, or like it was like might almost happen, was all these left-wing people defending it as if this is a platform of free speech. And so, in a way, these companies have managed to convince a lot of people, including a lot of us, that their products, which are designed to spy on us and influence us, are the same as as the public square, as a
Yeah.
platform of free speech. And so I think the left has to be looking intensely at these big tech companies and thinking about them as Exxon, as BP, as Shell. They are polluters. They are polluting our information ecology, and we have to figure out the policies that are going to rein them in. None of these none of these companies would exist if they were not allowed to spy on us, right? They simply wouldn't have a business model.
Yeah.
Uh, if you made people pay to be on Twitter, like how long would that last? So I really think this is a part of what the political left has to take up, is looking at the ways that surveillance capitalism has made it impossible to have a social movement.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't say it made it. We still have social movements, but damn, is it hard, right? And then also part of what happens is with the fragmentation of the information ecosystems, people live in different worlds and know completely different information. I mean, it
Totally.
seems to me that part of, so much of Elizabeth Warren's work with the consumer, whatever
Yeah.
protection, that agency, the idea of like not letting them be monopolies would be a first step towards maybe changing that. But right, that, obviously that's not going to happen now, but I really agree with you. So thank you. That's yeah.
And let me just add that, like, one of the problems, and I'm sure all of you guys in your movement, or in your nonprofit space, is that like you almost have to be on this shit. Like, I struggle with this a lot because I deleted almost all of it. I still have an Instagram account because when I got on book tour, like, you need a way to tell people you're going to be on book tour.
Yeah.
And so when you like lose the only platforms people are on is this stuff anymore, and you're almost faced with this like chicken and egg, this backwards chicken and egg thing, where you're like, well, we have to tell people we exist, so we need this stuff. And so that's why I think, like, as much as we'd all love to just be like, all right, like, I wash my hands, we boycotted, you almost can't because it's
Mhm.
commandeered. All of our communication, all of our public square. So anyway, I could babble about this for hours. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, and we need, like you said, we need to develop strategies for how to deal with it. And so, yeah, all right. So Louise says, how can we coordinate and strategize across sectors and work together?
Uh, I mean, that's a big question. Is there anything more specific, Luis? Hmm.
I think we'll let that, maybe it'll come back to us. So RL has the question. The character who stayed with me was Keeper, who really epitomized the downward spiral of the lower middle class Ohio dude. I've never thought this was an optimistic book any more than Dawn over a battlefield could be said to be optimistic. Did you tack on a semi-optimistic ending so that the reader wouldn't just fall into a pit of despair?
No, I mean, no, definitely not. I think again, the book represents, or the ending represents a realistic look at where we are, and where we could go. And like, let me say this, it's not even just like, I think eventually some form of what I put at the end of that book is going to happen. And the
Mhm.
reason is because the economy as currently constituted will not function in the future. Like we're already seeing like the crisis I predict with the insurance industry, that is already on the way. Everybody in California knows it. We're all
Yep.
living through it right now. And so the thought process I had behind the novel was that no climate disaster is going to shake people out of their stupor. None of that's going to produce change. But once our capitalist economy, once those dominoes are falling, yes, then elites are going to start, basically saying how can you save us? Like what can we do to save ourselves, right? And at that point, in this iteration of the book, the people in charge luckily are like, well, the only way to save yourselves is to save the planet. So we're going to try to do that. But yeah, the fundamentals of our economy are not strong because they're based upon a planet that is deteriorating rapidly. And our model for building everything in the world, all built infrastructure, is based on an insurance industry that is looking at models that are saying, hey, none of this is insurable anymore.
Yeah, yeah, right. So like, there's no like business as usual possibility at all. So yeah. Okay, Tom Athanasiou, who's ED of Equity, says you haven't been talking about international matters, but your book actually is very good on them. I particularly like your summary of the global deal that is made in 2037, the Climate Stabilization and Development Fund, I believe you called it. So, just any thoughts about that reflection from Tom?
Yeah, I'd like to point. Oh God, five times. Okay, there's a book called Five Times Faster by Simon Sharp that I really, really admire because it looks at our sort of global deal making from a different perspective. Like I think all of us are pretty jaded by the Conference of the Parties and sort of this idea that we're going to cram together every country in the world and sort of come up with like here's what you should do. Oh, but there's no penalty if you don't do it. So da da da. Like nobody here probably cares about that anymore because it has produced virtually nothing. However, what Simon Sharp talks about in Five Times Faster is that within these individual industries, if you start putting pressure on them from a state level, and you get like the countries of Europe to say, hey, we need low carbon steel. How do we start making low carbon steel? And you put in those policies, it begins to move this enormous sector much more rapidly.
Mhm.
And so I like this idea very much that we are looking at it from the wrong perspective of getting a bunch of sort of massive state governments into one room and trying to like hack out a deal, and more so like how regionally can we get a bunch of actors to agree on one very difficult slice of this and start moving that with real sort of carrots and sticks. And again, like a lot of that, what went into the IRA was what made me admire that. But yeah, sorry, I'm rambling again. But I do think that like some kind of obviously major contract and converge scheme would be wonderful, but we have to be looking at like, the low-hanging fruit, I guess, right now.
Yeah, no, interesting. You're not rambling. Okay, so somebody asked, talk about speculative fiction and seeing the future. What tools can you offer as a writer to the movement as a predictor of what's coming? How do you see the things that are kind of on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, so much like I'll say to people, it's like sometimes reading the book, it feels like I'm clairvoyant, but I'm not clairvoyant. I was just paying attention to the dynamics, to the
Mhm.
trends. And the trends were obvious by 2010 when I started writing this, even 2007 when I was first like sort of dreaming this novel up. Um, and I think like one of the tactics I used was first of all, look at a range of opinion on the issue. So obviously I wasn't looking at particularly any climate deniers, but I was reading people who were like, this isn't that big a deal. We can figure it out like this and this. And I was also reading the people who are like, we're fucked. It's all over, and everyone in between. And just trying to echolocate like, okay, who is like put forth the best evidence? Who is really thinking through the implications of all of this stuff? And then just adjudicating kind of, what authors and thinkers were pointing the way forward in a way that felt the most realistic, the least self-serving. And then once I had that extrapolation in my head of those trends, putting the fireflies in the jar and shaking it up, by which I mean putting my characters into that world and saying, okay, where are they going? What are they trying to do? What's happening to them? So I sort of laid out the tracks, laid the groundwork for where our world was headed. And that became part of the problem with how quickly events moved in the last 8 years was I kind of had the tracks already built. And so like I had to adjust so rapidly while I was writing the book to incorporate all of this insanity that became a big challenge. I call it like making the teeth of the zipper meet. Like the book had to meet reality. It had to meet the moment of its publication. And obviously now it's we're gonna live through this next 20 years and I'll be judged, I guess, on how right or wrong I was.
Yeah, though nobody like 1984, it's not a problem that's long past, and we're still like right drawing lessons from it, and it doesn't wreck the book. So, all right, Graham asks or says, as a veteran who served in Afghanistan, it's shocking to me how well you wrote the combat veterans in your book. Thank you for that. How did you put yourself into our minds?
Yeah, so it started with my first novel, Ohio. I don't know if you've read that, but Ohio has one of the main point of view characters of the four is a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan. He is not based on anyone I know, but very, very loosely based on a few different friends of mine. And I
Mhm.
sort of they were very generous with me in not just sharing their experiences or whatever, but sort of like I just a friendship of many, many years creates that empathy, I guess, in an author, to where you want to tell a story about somebody who's gone and done this thing, but you also don't want to obviously, fuck it up first. And second, try to prejudice it towards your specific political viewpoint. Like I definitely had a very specific political viewpoint about especially the war in Iraq.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I could not let that infect my thinking of it as I'm imagining this character, right?
Mhm.
Um, and it's funny because like now that I like look back at that first novel, it was so much sort of me trying to like think through my anger about that. About like a set specifically about a set of people in power who callously sort of sent a bunch of people in my generation, young people, friends I had and loved into this quagmire without any idea what they were doing. Just like an absolute clueless set of people. Doing an immense damage to this whole generation of kids, mostly from like rural America, right?
Right.
Um, and yeah, and so obviously, again, a ton of research, a ton of thinking about it, a ton of trying to empathize, which is a much different tool set than, again, being a polemicist, making your point of view known. And I've really tried in my writing to like write about our political and social world, but not come at it just from like my own vantage.
Nice. Research and empathy, right? Like that's I love that. That like those are the two kind of big ingredients. So then on the research side, somebody wanted to know more about other climate scientists that influence you besides Hansen.
Oh God, I mean, I could like my shelf on outside in the other room is just like, I mean, my friends will come over and just look at it and be like, "This is the most depressing shelf of books I've ever seen." Uh, I'm trying. Sorry, this is so hard off the top of my head.
Okay.
Oh, God, what's his name? Michael Mann. Michael
Yeah.
Mann was kind enough. The first chapter of the book, I wrote as a short story in like 2013, or it got published in 2013. I sent it to him, and he sent me back a very nice note. Eventually, he would read the whole novel.
Oh,
Uh,
well.
Yeah, so he's another one. Yeah, if I sat down for a moment later, I could go into it more broadly, but yeah.
It's all good. So he read it, and so he read it in draft form and gave you feedback.
You know what's funny is he didn't really give me any feedback. He was just like, "This is great." That was basically.
Also, but at least you
Well,
knew you didn't make any big mistakes, so that's good.
I became friends with some people who worked on the policy side of it. Specifically, this one, I probably shouldn't name it anyway. But anyway, he works for like a think tank that does a lot of energy policy. They worked on the IRA, et cetera, et cetera. He was the one I really leaned on. I gave him the whole book and was just like, "Go through this and tell me everything you think about it." Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and I never forget when he got me back in touch with me. He was like, "So, what is your background in like international climate negotiation?" And I was like, "Wait, what?" He literally thought I had a background in it, and I was like, "Thank you, sir. Like that is the compliment I needed right now." So, um,
Right.
yeah, you always screw stuff up, little decals here and there, and you work to hammer them out. But yeah, I mean, I think part of what I love about the fiction that I do at least is it's this enormous intellectual project. It's just like I'm trying to understand something from a lot of different angles in every different way I can, and it's incredibly fun. It's
Yeah.
enjoyable.
Which sort of gets to actually another question that was asked about your like the choice to sort of switch between first, second, and third person kind of throughout the novel. Just any thoughts about that artistic choice?
Yeah, well, I mean, primarily what I wanted to do with those switching of points of view, and this also goes to the sections with the headlines.
Hmm.
And all the news stories crammed in, is this feeling of cacophony. In our contemporary information ecology, again, we are just so bombarded with those voices. And I wanted to create the sense of like you never quite know what the next voice will be. You turn the page after the chapter's over and you're like, where are we? What are we doing now? The other
Yeah.
thing that technique did is after the first section, it's sort of training you subliminally how to read the book. So
Yes.
by the time you get to the middle of it, you're reading the first sentence. Oh, this is you. It's you. It's Keeper.
Yeah.
Uh, or it's in the first person, and and you understand it's Jackie, or whatever it
Yeah.
might be. Uh, and so those were just like sort of some different tactics to also like keep people engaged. One of the big things I did in the edit was the original version of this book was 1,500 pages. And so I cut like, almost a third of it uh, because I wanted it to move. I wanted it to almost
Mhm.
read like a thriller in a way.
Yeah.
It's gaining steam. It's becoming more propulsive. And I think by giving the reader those little changes in perspective, it's just another reason to be curious, to lean in, you
Yeah.
know. So much of storytelling is always just like goes back to like ancient humans sitting around the campfire and sort of like figuring out what's the first sentence that's going to make people be like, okay, I'm ready to hear this.
Yeah, but I just want to say, as a reader, you did that beautifully well because sometimes when people do those kind of switches, I find I have to work too hard to figure out where I am, and I didn't feel it like this was an easy book to read, even though there were those switches, which is not an easy thing to do for as a writer. Um, so Martin asked, would you be willing to share any thoughts you have on other climate future novels like Kim Stanley Robinson's New York 2140 or Naomi Alderman's The Future?
I mean, confession, I actually didn't read almost any climate fiction novels for this.
Oh, wow.
Mostly just to like keep it out of my head. I think like guarding
Mhm.
against what other people have done was pretty important to me.
Yeah.
I could like make sure my vision was my vision. And then by the time I got done with it, I was like, I do not want to read any more climate fiction. Like I've read my book 900 times to like edit it.
Yeah.
I just can't right now. So that's kind of what happened.
Yeah. Fair, fair, fair. Okay. Taylor from the IBEW just wants to know if you could paint us a picture of your writing space. What's in it? How do you sit down to write? What are the elements involved in the steps? Just a little bit about your process.
Yeah, I mean, I'm literally sitting in it right now. This is just my office. I've got a desk, a no frills, like some gack from my travels and my whatever all over. It's a mess, so I won't turn the camera around. It's just full of books and papers and whatnot. And my sort of theory is like when I taught, I used to teach, and I always tell like, if you're waiting for inspiration, you're doing it wrong. Like, like real artists just get up and go to work.
Yep.
That's what I do every day is I just first thing I make my coffee. I don't even eat breakfast. I just sit down and sort of work for an hour just to get like the juices flowing. And yeah, and I think you can like write a remarkable amount if you just develop the habit and sit down and do it. And so that's sort of always been my technique. Uh, and I find it, I don't know, it's like for me, it is my absolute favorite time of the day. Like I love the process of writing. I love especially when it's hard. Like I'm working on this thing now, which was such a mess when I started, and I'm sort of like hammering it out and like reshaping it. And to me, it's like that's the fun of it, which is I like am so sad that so many writers of the future are going to just put into ChatGPT like I need a good paragraph about a snowy field, and then they'll just copy and paste that in, which I know is happening already. And it's so depressing to me because part of the fun is that you write a paragraph about a snowy field and it's cliched and it sucks. And then you have to go back and sort of figure out, okay, why does this suck? And
Yeah.
it's that like engagement with your own intellect and that your sort of your puzzle solving abilities. That's the joy of it.
Yeah.
And it's my favorite part. And so I often tell people it's like I have not even seen the ChatGPT homepage. I don't know what it looks like. I want to keep this precious thing I have that has given me so much in life, including sort of like my buoyancy and my happiness. I want to keep it exactly the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to love the process, right? Yeah. All right. RL asked, why did you have nothing from Kate's point of view? Why did you tell it from the perspective of Matt?
That's a great question. So originally, I was going to toggle into Kate's point of view. That was sort of the plan when I first started, and then I like got this idea that with a larger than life character, with somebody who is like such a firebrand and such a like a big public persona, it almost removes the mystery when you step inside her head. Uh,
Hmm.
and so that's when I was
Yeah.
like, okay, how else do I do this? And to me, and this was like what actually like got the novel firing on all cylinders. It was like, oh, it's going to
Yeah.
be from the perspective of this guy who had the misfortune of falling in love with her and whose
Right.
entire life has been shaped by this person who, is magnetic and charming and so wonderful, and yet who is also has her selfishness and her ego and who breaks his heart. And
Yeah.
once I like had that whole idea in my head, it was impossible to shy away from. And so you do get like this mini snippet of going into Kate's head at one point as just like this tease of what this what has been powering this woman all of these years. Um, but at the end of the day, it's like that's one of my favorite parts of the book that I figured out was just like, no, like don't tell it from her point of view. Tell it from this guy who is just like heartbroken by her. And
Right.
then, you see that develop over the course. And so by the end, you get this sensation of just like, having lived a lifetime with a tragedy at the center of yourself, which I really enjoy and I think like worked well.
Yeah, no, I thought it worked beautifully. Is there a character who not in terms of their affect and their personality and their life experience, but in terms of their sort of politics and point of view, you identify with the most? Like who's the most you?
Well, I mean, I think like obviously like intellectually I am most you know the Kate or Ash are probably the two intellectually that I sort of would hew closest to. But again, like each of them has stuff that I don't. And I think that was important was to make sure they are their own separate people with their own separate ideas of the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, I always joke that like Ash's extreme rationality and hard-headed pragmatism sort of
Mhm.
like turned me from more of a romantic to more of a hard-headed pragmatist. Like I would
Mhm.
say when I started the novel, I might have been much closer to Shane and moved toward,
Uh-huh.
and then finally ended up moving towards Ash in this bizarre way, which is interesting. I don't know if it means anything other than. it happened to me.
Well, and also you read a lot of stuff and thought this through pretty intensely. So, okay, so we're kind of coming to the end of our time. So, I just any parting thoughts to this room of climate activists? That I mean, you just shared a lot with us, right? It's a super rich dialogue, and I feel like I'm already taking a lot out of it. But just any, yeah, words of advice or encouragement or whatever, criticism, anything, just to a room of climate activists.
No, not all. Look, like I know in our movement, we all get incredibly frustrated with each other and with our work, which is so vital and so difficult and so frustrating. And especially right now, just feels like terrifyingly urgent. But we look, I allow myself every now and then in a moment of absolute despair, staring at the ceiling at 4 a.m. But the fact is, we don't have the luxury of despair. We have to keep going. We have to keep working at this. We have to keep adjusting tactics or figuring out new paths. We have to keep working with people we might not always agree with, and sometimes letting bygones be bygones to get big things done. Like we just don't have another choice. And keep doing what you're doing, stay passionate, stay engaged, try to stay a little joyful about it. Like I know that's a bizarre thing to say, but like I was talking about writing the book, it's like this book left me with so much dread and terror and sort of despair about where we're headed. And at the same time, like writing it was the most important thing I've ever done in my life. And it gave me the fuel to get where I am and to be lucky enough to talk to folks like you. So hopefully you guys feel the same way about your work and just keep it up. And yeah, I hope next time we talk, it might be under better circumstances, but yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can everybody please join me in appreciating Stephen with emojis or like, reaction things, put it into the chat. Yeah, thank you just for being so generous with your time and also just with your dialogue. It's been really fun. And I'm now going to pass it over to Luis.
Thank you so much, Cynthia and Stephen, for this incredible conversation. Yes, everybody, please give a virtual round of applause to Stephen. Thank you for joining us today as well. With everything that we discussed today in consideration, we know that this present moment in time is counting on us to organize against oligarchy in America, right? Holding the polluting fossil fuel industry accountable for their harm on communities and to implement community-led solutions for the ever-present climate crisis. So given this reality, I greatly encourage you to please make a donation to Fossil Free California today, as your contributions monetarily support this organizing work that we do every single day to address climate change and push for pension divestment of fossil fuels in the effort to have a just transition away from the fossil fuel industry into a renewable and clean energy, while also incorporating labor into this process and giving them a seat at the table. So I just actually linked in the chat our support link to support via a donation of your choice. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. I really, really appreciate it.